Hello folks, this week we got the announcement of patch 11.17, the legacy of Arathor, and it seems that the World of Warcraft dev team are continuing to experiment with their mid-expansion content offering, with a bunch of new event-based content. The biggest single feature though required its own video teaser from game director Ion Hazikostas, announcing a built-in version of a rotation helper similar to the Hekili addon. This was accompanied with the announcement of longer-term plans to try to reduce our reliance on add-ons by adding even more new functionality into the base UI. You don't have to look far to find people who advocate a complete ban on add-ons in World of Warcraft, but I think most folks would argue that the current UI isn't really where it needs to be to make such a transition viable for a player base who have been accustomed to the benefits of add-ons for the last 2 decades. Which means that for those who do want to be able to rely less on add-ons in future, an initiative like this is just what is needed. I'll be diving into all of this later on in the video, but first of all, let's start with looking at the new content to come in this new patch. The War Within story campaign is set to take quite a surprising direction, with Faerun Lothar teaming up with Danath Trollbane to try to calm growing tensions between the Horde and Alliance in a new Arathi Highlands-based 2-chapter storyline, which will allow us to experience the story from both the Alliance and Horde perspective. It's going to be interesting to see the return of overt political, if not military, tensions between the factions. After BFA, I personally had a bit of faction conflict fatigue, but I know a lot of players find the current peace between the Horde and Alliance to be quite contrary to the spirit of World of Warcraft. So I think this is a change that will probably be welcomed by quite a lot of players. That said, it does seem very odd to me that the proposed peacemakers are an alliance leader and Anduin's new friend. This isn't the only story content we're getting though, with Lore Walker Cho making a return to offer us access to 3 new leveling storylines. These storylines all consist of a mixture of 2 existing old content quest lines topped off with a brand new quest line or scenario, and can be experienced on any character of level 10 and above. And these storylines will get to meet the Ethereals, taking us back to Burning Crusade's Netherstorm, and then forwards to the Shadowlands to meet the Brokers and visit Tazavesh. What's very interesting about this particular story is that it seems to imply that there may be some direct link between the Ethereals and the Brokers, beyond just their obvious cultural similarities. The second story is a mini recap of Xal'atath's backstory, which will allow us to experience the Shadow Priest's Artifacts questline, the BFA 815 Xal'atath story, and then a brand new scenario where we get to find out how Xal'atath ended up in that blade in the first place. And finally, there's a revisit of Arthas the Lich King's story, allowing us to visit an updated culling of Stratholme, and it appears we'll also be able to experience the fall of Arthas and Icecrown from his perspective, which sounds very similar to the Legion scenario where we got to play Illidan as he fought against the heroes of Azeroth in their mismatched gear back in the Black Temple. I think it's great to see the devs experimenting with new ways to level up characters. Speaking as someone with 32 alts to level up, being restricted to the same 4 zones and dungeons between level 70 and 80 does get a little bit old after a while, and I've long wished that they would let us use other alternatives. Delves are going to be getting a new gameplay mode called Overcharged Delves, which will see the addition of affixes to 6 of the delves, along with a new talent tree which will allow us to overcome those extra challenges. This new mode is going to be optional, so we'll still be able to do those delves in their existing form. And this will offer us brand new rewards, including a new mech suit and an upgradable belt. Data mining suggests that the belt can be upgraded to item level 694 and will be usable in other content, so it very much looks like being an equivalent to Cersei's circlet, which is an interesting choice to add along with the head enchant that we're getting from Horrific Visions. I guess borrowed power is definitely making a return in this expansion. Event wise, we're seeing the return of the greedy Emissary, who we last saw during the Diablo 4 launch crossover event. This will be a calendar event, most likely launching some way into the new pack, and will offer a brand new mount along with recolours of the Tier 2 Transmog set. This event will also include a new buff, Collector's Bounty, which will increase the drop rates of loot and legacy content in Azeroth. What that will mean is unclear at the moment. The team have promised to share more details, but it's very likely to involve pre-Dragonflight content. Another event we're getting in this new patch is the return of Turbulent Timeways, which this time is being used to introduce Battle for Azeroth to the time-walking rotations. This is a bit of a belated addition, as we didn't see any expansion to the time-walking pool during Dragonflight, but I guess we did get the classic time-walking back in patch 11.05, so it is kinda balancing out. The Turbulent Timeways event will last for 6 weeks and include 2 visits to Battle for Azeroth, and as always there's going to be a new mount. Back in Shadowlands, when I first saw the publicity for the new Tazavesh Mega Dungeon and the Time Captain Hooktail boss, I have always wanted my own Infinite Pirate Dragon mount. And now at long last we're going to be getting it with the Chrono Corsair mount. I suspect there's going to be quite a lot more interest than usual in this particular Turbulent Timeways event. Of course, the addition of a new expansion to the time walking rotation also means a brand new vendor. And as with the other time walking vendors, we're getting 2 new mounts: the Moonlit Nightsaver and the Ivory Sagemane. These will likely cost 5,000 Time Warp badges each, so you better get back to saving them up. And finally, there's a couple of other bits of new content that were not announced by Blizzard, but which have turned up on the PTR. First of these is the potential addition of a new meta achievement for Legion called Ashes to Ashes. It's currently populated with a bunch of placeholder entries, many from the BFA meta, so it's very clearly a work in progress and we don't really have much idea what we'll be asked to do so far. There's also currently no guarantee that this will actually make it to live in 11.17, but with the BFA meta turning up in 11.07, I do think that it is a decent chance that we will get it. And once we know more about what will be in it, I will update you all in my weekly news update. The other bit of bonus content is a brand new ability that's going to be added to every character called Recuperate. This sets out a campfire out of combat, which allows you to regain up to 150% of your max health, and this scales with your leveling gear. This is likely to be pretty useful when leveling more fragile specializations with no self-heals, replacing that basic health food, but unfortunately it does not restore mana, so you probably won't be using this in instances. I do wonder if this will mean that we can expect to see a revamp of the Harvest Festival holiday event at some point, as currently the only thing that that particular event offers us is level scaling food, and that's going to be pretty pointless now. Anyways, that's the main content from the new patch, so let's get on and dive into the big add-ons announcement. Blizzard have had a long history of cherry picking some of the more essential add-ons such as the on-screen quest log and baking them into the default user interface, and this time around it's the return of rotational helpers such as Hekili. For those of you who are not familiar with these type of add-ons, a rotation helper displays on-screen recommendations of what ability to press next in combat. These add-ons are surprisingly powerful, being able to take into account your character's talents, health, current resources, and even the number of enemies you face. While these rotation helpers are used all the time by some players, a very common use is as a learning tool to help one learn a new class or specialization. Speaking as someone who maintains an all-army, which includes almost every DPS and tank spec, most of which I only ever level up and then leave there, I found Hekili to be quite useful in saving me the time of trying to learn specs that I'm not going to play very much. One thing that these add-ons cannot do for us though is press the ability for us. Changing what abilities a button or key press does in combat is something that Blizzard have heavily restricted over the years. However, very surprisingly, the new built-in rotational helper will be able to do this, with the addition of a brand new single action button that will always cast the next recommended ability. This one button option will come with a small 0.3 second GCD penalty, which will very likely mean that you will not be topping the DPS meters if you use it. This feature is entirely focused on DPS. It does not recommend healing abilities, nor does it cover major cooldowns and defensive, so its utility in, say, Raids or Mythic Plus, I think is going to be very limited. That said, testing in the PTR suggests that it does do a pretty decent job on many specializations, and I do think that it will be very viable as an option in open world content and even lower level dungeons, LFR, and perhaps maybe even normal raiding for some players. One area where I think it could be particularly useful is in opening up the game to players who have vision or severe limb disabilities. Pretty much all of us are just one road traffic accident or a major illness away from losing access to a lot of the things we enjoy in our lives. So anything that enables people to continue to play their favourite games is, in my view, a great addition to have. One concern I do have though is the impact that maintaining this is going to have on the development team. Once this goes live, just as with the starter build for the talent trees, every time the developers revamp a specialization or even just tweak some abilities, they're going to have to go back and check and likely update these rotational helpers. And that's going to take time and effort, meaning that class and spec changes will now be a little bit more expensive for the team to deliver. And unless that increased development cost comes with more development resources, there is a risk that this could slow down the pace of class updates. A more serious question for me is how well will this be maintained in future? The World of Warcraft development team have unfortunately a bit of a history of adding things in an expansion only to move on and leave them behind in the next. For example, with the current starter builds, it stops giving any recommendations above level 70, leaving a new player to very suddenly have to start figuring out what to do with those hero talents. And this can be a particular problem for some classes who have a hero talent that's incompatible with the starter build trees. The introduction of a one-button rotation has, as you might expect, generated an awful lot of discussion in the community, with some players expressing concerns that it's dumbing down the game. A lot of the reactions on that front, in my personal opinion, seem to be knee-jerks. At the end of the day, it's not really mine or anyone else's business how someone else plays the game, unless of course it impacts our success in group play, in which case there's a very simple solution. Just don't invite underperforming players. In practice, I suspect that this rotational helper is likely to slightly improve success rates in low-level queued content, as yes, there are going to be players who are going to do more DPS with it. But for any type of mainstream or high-level play, I really don't see a tool like this beating player skill. The rotational helper was not all that was discussed in this new add-ons update. Ian also revealed that this is part of plans by the development team to speed up the process of baking more add-on functionality into the default user interface, including potentially boss mods like DBM, nameplates, and damage meters. These types of combat add-ons are among the most widely used add-ons in the game, and for good reason, as they do fill major gaps in the game's built-in toolkit. While it is possible to play World of Warcraft without any add-ons, even up to a fairly mainstream level such as heroic raiding or doing weekly plus 10s, Ian did acknowledge that at the very higher levels of play, combat add-ons do eventually become mandatory, and part of the WoW dev team's goal is to change that. This does mean that at some point in the future, the team will be looking to add some more severe restrictions in what combat add-ons can do. But that's something that's some way down the road, with Ian saying that he recognises that there's a long journey ahead of the developers before they reach a point where it would be possible to do that without making the game experience much worse for many players. Those restrictions, though, are not going to mean the end of add-ons. Ian also confirmed that the developers do see a lot of value in the ability of add-ons to provide deeper customization for their user interface, and purely informational add-ons like quest helpers are not going anywhere. So if you're a fan of things like Handy Notes, Rarity, or hopefully Rare Scanner, the message is don't worry, they are not going to be going away. What I do find a little bit strange though is that the team have chosen a rotational helper as the lead into this initiative. It's not exactly a tool that gets a lot of use in Mythic raiding or high-end Mythic Plus. And unlike something like nameplates, it is not a feature that many people have been asking to be added to the game. Ever since the built-in user interface was updated back in Dragonflight, players have been calling out the weaknesses of the current nameplate system. And well, I will leave it to you, my audience, to tell me, should a rotational helper really be treated as a higher priority by the dev team than revamping those nameplates? I'm planning to do a follow-up video, most likely in a couple of weeks, where I'll take a deeper look at the kind of add-ons that Blizzard might be wanting to replace and the kind of improvements to the main user interface that I'd like to see. If you don't want to miss out on that and you're not currently a subscriber, then do hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. While the new patch announcement has been getting most of the attention this week, there has been a few other updates impacting the live game, including another round of fixes for the Nightfall event. These fixes have, at least for me, finally allowed me to experience a few runs through with the event working as intended, albeit I have still been experiencing the occasional issue, so it's not 100%. And that does mean that at long last I'm able to form a proper first impression of it. Overall, the new event shares the same DNA as the more combat-oriented world events like Researchers Under Fire or Time Rifts. And with a 10-step Renown track to grind through, it seems to me that Blizzard were hoping to replicate the success of the Time Rift. Sadly, I don't think that this event quite manages that. While there are a decent set of objectives, and some, such as the one where you pick up injured Arathi and then bundle them into a healing ring, do try to offer some variety, the event for me lacks the chaotically fun vibe of those Time Rifts. I think that part of the reason for that is the very static defend the Arathi theme, along with a lack of variety in the end bosses. But I also get a very strong sense that the pool of available objectives that the event draws from is a lot shallower than was the case for the Time Rift, which overall means that it starts to feel quite samey after just a couple of runs. That's not a problem for events which are designed to be weekly activities like Theatre Troupe or Researchers Under Fire, but that Renown track encourages us to do this event a lot more regularly, and I cannot convince myself that the event is really built to fulfill that role. And of course, this event also has to contend with the very bad first impressions that we got from the state it was released in. First impressions really matter in video games, and I suspect that for many of us, that bad first impression is going to continue to cast a negative shadow over the event. Another major update was made to the Raid Renown track, the Galazio Loyalty Club. A launch day issue with patch 11.15 had led to some players suddenly jumping from Renown 8 all the way to Renown 20, which was a bit of a major issue as that came with an 18% DPS boost. To address this, the track has been fully reset back to Renown 9 for everyone, even players who didn't have any current progress on it, which I guess means that it's got a bit of a nice catch up. One side effect of this is that you will need to revisit the Renown Quartermaster just inside the raid to regain some of your existing rewards, so do make sure to do that before you head off to do any bosses. For the more cosmetic rewards like the mounts and titles that were gained due to the bug, these are not being removed, but they will be unusable until you re-earn the required renown. Staying in the subject of fixing up issues with the raid, and last week the Mythic Raid Hall of Fame reached 200 guilds. This would normally have meant that the Hall of Fame would have been closed with the reset. However, the Hall of Fame had also experienced a bunch of issues, this time around with a few guilds buying Mythic lockouts to skip the second last boss Mugsy. To address this, Blizzard have updated the Hall of Fame to now require that you do the last 3 bosses, and this change hasn't been retroactively applied, meaning that guilds who were already on Gallywix are going to have to go back and re-clear those bosses as well. Because of this, Blizzard have announced that the Hall of Fame is going to be extended until the coming reset this week, to give those guilds a little bit more time to recover. All in all, this has been a very messy Hall of Fame, with the final positions in the hall not really accurately reflecting the actual order that some guilds were able to clear the raid. I'm not sure how important the position in the rankings are for those guilds in the 150 to 200 range, but I do hope that Blizzard updates the Hall of Fame criteria in future to avoid a repeat of this. There's also some good news for Mythic Plus players who were unhappy that the new Dinars system, the puzzling cartel chips, would not allow the purchase of Myth Track items without Mythic raiding. After pushback from the community, the developers are now going to add a selection of Mythic Plus trinket to the Dinars vendor. These items will only be available on Myth Track to players who have completed all Mythic Plus dungeons on a plus 12 and above. While it's good to see Mythic Plus being included in the system, this is still going to create a weird no man's land for players who do plus 10s and 11s, who will be getting Myth Track gear from their vault but be restricted to Hero Track items on the vendor. For me, the introduction of this system has, despite the very long wait for any concrete information, felt quite rushed and half-baked, and I'm starting to wonder if the developers are now regretting having announced that the Dinars system would be returning in the first place. Overall, I think there are a lot of lessons for the developers to learn, as this has harmed trust with the community. With the start of a brand new month, and we have a brand new trading post, and this time around the star items are a hedgehog mount, the spring harvest hog, and a new Bakar mount, the brown furred spiky Bakar. This variant is much smaller than Taiwan, which should hopefully mean that for folks who dread the Dragonflight meta, Taiwan will still continue to feel very special. The monthly reward for filling the Trader's Tender bar is quite special. Weechi is a unique new pet which offers the ability to customize its appearance, similar to the Delver's dirigible and dragon riding mounts. And finally, this coming week sees the US leg of the Warcraft 30th Anniversary Tour, which is taking place at PAX East in Boston. The new event is going to include a developer panel called Evolving Azeroth, Creating a Living World, Past, Present and Future. This discussion is billed to include a raft of developers who'll be discussing past events like the opening of the gates of Anchorage, but also taking a look at the future evolution of the game. How public this is going to be remains to be seen, but I'm personally hopeful that it will get recorded and be shared, perhaps in the Warcraft YouTube channel. And that's it for this week's update. I'd be super interested to hear your thoughts on the new patch content, the future of add-ons, or where you think the War Within story is going to go next. So do sound off in the comments down below. If you found this update useful, fun, or even just plain annoying, then do let me know by hitting the like icon. And if you haven't already, then this is your last chance to support my channel by hitting that subscribe button right now before you forget. Again, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.